Good morning.
Good morning.
Welcome to a new decade. We're going to start and make this the best decade the state of Ohio has ever seen, right?
Awesome.
So I call the Senate Energy and Public Utilities Committee together, and it will come to order. Staff, please call the roll.
Chairman Wilson.
Present.
Vice Chairman McCauley. Here. Ranking Member Williams is checked in. Brenner. Senator Wert. Here. Senator Craig.
Here.
Senator Dolan. Checked in. Senator Eklund. Senator Hoagland.
Here.
Senator Huffman.
Here.
Senator O'Brien.
One.
Senator Peterson is on his way. Senator Ruley. We have a quorum.
Thank you. We have a quorum present. We will proceed as a full committee. All right, I will now call up Senate Bill 234 for its second hearing. We have 9 in-person witnesses that have signed up to testify, and we have on your iPads, this was no small task to get that on your iPads by this morning, but we have over 300 written testimonies. To give you a little history, we've seen you all before and enjoyed the way you have conducted yourself when we were going through the HB6. And unfortunately, I had to cut out everything except for the question at hand because of our time constraint, but promised you that in the new year we would take it back up, and that is what is happening today. So like when we were together before, with as many witnesses as we have, it's important that you don't all stand up and say the same thing. I want all of you to have your time. We're not giving you any time restriction, but please try to emphasize new things other than what the person before you talked about. And with that, we're going to get started, and we're going to call our first witness, which is Chris Aichholz. Chris, would you come to the podium, please? Welcome.
Welcome. Thank you. Chairman Wilson, Vice Chairman McCauley, Ranking Member Williams, and members of the committee. My name is Chris Aichholz. I am a resident of Seneca County, and I'm here today to provide proponent testimony on SB234. This bill is absolutely critical to me and thousands of people all across Ohio. In neighboring states such as Indiana, Michigan, Illinois, local control is predominant in the siting of industrial scale wind projects. However, here in Ohio, that is not the case. Large projects are reviewed and approved only at the state level by the Ohio Power Siting Board. The members who make up this board are not elected officials, but rather are appointed. Yet these board members, along with the wind industry corporations from outside of Ohio, make all the decisions without having full knowledge of local priorities held by area citizens. In Seneca County, we are facing as many as 6 very large industrial wind turbine projects. These projects will cover over 250 square miles of agricultural, residential zone land. While I acknowledge there are leases signed with landowners to enable these projects to happen, I believe it is inexcusable that there is very little opportunity for collective community input in the design and execution of these transformative projects. For instance, in my area, several of these project proposals have had poor designs which have led to extensive unrest and opposition to them. Some of these design flaws include the reduction of the usefulness of our local area airports, the limiting of air ambulance accessibility, locating 21 wind turbines within a 2.5-mile radius of our county nature preserve, placing dozens of industrial wind turbines within 2 miles of active eagles nests, placing as many as 16 600-foot tall wind turbines within a 2-mile radius of our newest local K-12 school, which intervened against the Seneca Wind project. They had to spend their resources to defend themselves in the proceeding. Placing dozens of these turbines in Ohio's largest single karst formations, which is highly unstable. Currently, the only way local citizens can even try to address these issues is by spending hundreds of thousands of dollars on legal counsel to represent them in the OPSB process. Our county, schools, park district, airports, local residents all must come up with significant amounts of money to fund their interventions. Such a process is extremely burdensome on locals just to ensure that they have a spot in the process. Currently, Republic Wind has reached the adjudicatory hearing phase, where we have continuously witnessed the developer, Apex Clean Energy, try to discredit, degrade, and even have elected officials, experts, local residents, and other citizens blocked from even providing testimony. And even after expending all this money, time, and effort in the process, which the state now calls local input, there is no guarantee that any of the specific issues which are our concerns of the community will even be addressed. The current wind projects process is fundamentally flawed, unjust, and abusive to the citizens of Ohio. Trying to justify the current process by saying it will help the environment and is good for business is but rubbing of salt in the wounds of Ohio residents who have been disenfranchised. There is no other form of economic development that transforms an entire community into heavy industrial zones and does so without the consensus agreement of local residents and is indefensible. Under this system, people like me and my family are left without a voice in the complete transformation of our neighborhood in which we live. Seneca Wind proposes to place 27 wind turbines as tall as 652 foot tall within a 2-mile radius of my home. My wife and I searched a long time and purchased a home in a wonderful location to give us ample opportunities for growth, enjoyment, and the potential to raise our 2 young children in a safe and peaceful location. As proposed, Seneca Wind would have transformed our neighborhood into a heavy industrial zone without being able to afford attorneys to try to have some say in the matter. Although the referendum opportunity offered by SB234 is no guarantee that my concern would be remedied, at least I would know our voices were heard. That is what makes SB 234 such great legislation. It ensures that hardworking folks, whether opposed or in favor of the project, have a voice. I humbly acknowledge that my voice is no more important than any other citizens, but I am adamantly contend that it is of no less importance either. Should a local vote provide that the majority of citizens in my township are in favor of the wind project, it would make the transformation easier for me to accept, because I would know it was a consensus opinion of my neighbors and wasn't the result of outside forces or agendas. Moving forward without the legislation will leave communities without a voice, and wind development will continue to drive wedges between friends, neighbors, and even families. I urge you to support Senate Bill 234, which will ensure Ohioans a voice in the future of their communities and provide the great state of Ohio treats its citizens with the dignity and respect that they truly deserve. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for your testimony. Are there any questions from the committee? Senator Burke.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and in the interest of time, Chris, you'll be the only one that I'll ask a question of, because, being your senator, right?
Yeah.
Got to kind of level the field here a little bit. But I think in your testimony, it's important for folks to probably look at the map where you've outlined your home and the proximity really within anywhere from 1/3 to half a mile from your home of some of these wind turbines. And I think to clarify your ask with this particular piece of legislation, and other folks can respond if they wish, you're not asking for a change in existing law, either an expansion or contraction, which was a bill that I voted on, if you remember, some years ago, where we kind of renormalized those limits. What you're asking for in Senator McCauley's piece of legislation is the ability to have input into a process. And again, I reflect back to your map with the proximity of these to your home. Is that a fair representation of what the ask actually is in your testimony?
Yeah, Chairman Wilson, Senator
Thank
Burke.
you. Proceed.
Yes, I mean, right now the system doesn't afford us a local voice other than hiring expensive attorneys, and even then we're limited in what we can actually have a say in the process. Giving us SB 234 gives us an opportunity for every citizen, whether they're leaseholders, whether they're non-leaseholders, non-participants, a voice by vote, and we feel that that's very important.
Very good. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator McCauley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for your testimony. Just to put some of this in perspective, you mentioned in your testimony 250 square miles under these projects of Seneca County would be potentially covered by these wind projects. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And so to put that in perspective, that's 160 acres, or 160,000 acres that would be covered. To further put it in perspective, Seneca County's land mass is 553 square miles. And so roughly half of Seneca County would be covered by these. And you also mentioned, I believe you said 652 feet tall would be the height of some of these turbines. To put that in perspective, the Statue of Liberty is 305 feet tall, including the base, and the Rife Tower is 503 feet tall. And so imagine, if you will, to get to your point about transformation of the landscape, half of your county, largely rural residential agricultural area, being covered by 652 feet tall turbines that are essentially taller than many skyscrapers, and you had no say locally about it. And just to get to the question, that was the drive of your testimony, correct?
Yes, correct.
All right, thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you again for your testimony. Appreciate you being here. Would now like to call to the podium Anthony Paradiso, and I hope I did that okay.
Chairman Wilson, Vice Chairman McCauley, and Ranking Member Williams, and members of the committee, my name is Anthony Paradiso, and I am a resident of Pleasant Township, Seneca County. I'm here to express my support for Senate Bill 234. I'm also one of 3 county commissioners. While I'm speaking on behalf of myself today, I believe my views are shared by my fellow commissioners. In November of 19, we approved a resolution in support of House Bill 401 and have had a number of public discussions in support of that bill. Many of you may question why a referendum for industrial wind projects is justified. Why should 600-foot tall industrial wind turbines with massive blades spinning at 200 miles an hour be treated differently than any other types of power? Wind development is unlike any other power generation because it is an extremely inefficient sort of power. The inefficiency requires wind to cover vast areas of land, unlike natural gas and nuclear power plants. Wind turbines developments cover many square miles, as Senator just alluded to. 1 mile equals 640 acres. Today in Ohio, zoning is preempted in the area impacted by any power generator. Normally, a preemption of zoning affects a relatively small defined area of land within local jurisdiction. The zoning preemption granted for wind is not simply local defined area, but instead a complete overthrow of zoning across multiple jurisdictions in hundreds of square miles. It is not merely an exemption, but a complete disregard for the principle of zoning and the notion of home rule. It throws the whole concept of zoning on its head. No other power generation source does this. The number of landowners affected by a nuclear power plant, a natural gas facility, coal-fired plant is relatively small when compared to the number of landowners within the footprint of a wind turbine development. Whereas perhaps 100 or more households may be impacted in a neighborhood baseload power plant, a wind turbine project can adversely affect thousands of households. One must ask whether the adverse impacts to the households with and near the footprint of wind turbine development can be justified, given the need for power and wind's value as a generation source. I don't think so. The Public Utilities Commission of Ohio has found a recent AEP case that the grid operator, PGM, projects margins of energy and capacity are more than sufficient to meet reliability in the region. The North American Energy Reliability Corporation came to a similar conclusion. In its most recent assessment of the reserve margin for 18 and 19, the NAERC projects that through 21 and 22 power reserve margins will average approximately 21.3%. So building wind facilities anywhere in the PJM service area is unnecessary, since the grid already has sufficient and reliable energy production. Therefore, building in populated rural residential Ohio communities through the use of widespread zoning preemption just can't be justified. Moreover, the introduction of intermittent power provided by wind is destabilizing the grid. This provides yet another argument for why wind should not be accorded the benefit of this widespread zoning preemption. Wind power is distinct from baseload power generators, which consume far less land and provide far superior product. When I talk to the people in the Seneca County, I often hear that they are doing their own research in these types of projects. I frequently hear from our constituents that the cost of these projects would outweigh the perceived benefits. How can the loss of amenity or a potential barrier of building a home for a family member who owns a farm that's been in the family for generations, but now possibly lies within the safety setback area of an industrial wind turbine, be a condition that is imposed on that citizen without them having any say in the matter? In conclusion, I realize everyone's testimony is important. I would ask you to please review the testimony submitted by two families who are residents of my home township, Gerald and Paula Wilbert and Doug and Kathy Scheidler. Both are heartbreaking stories. In my view, they are abused citizens and have struggled to have a voice. It is important that we pass SB 234 and bring local control back to the townships and to the people. This would prevent the types of situations mentioned in the Wilbert and Scheidler testimony from occurring, and it would protect our communities. I urge your favorable consideration, and thank you.
Well, thank you very much for your testimony. Questions from the committee? Senator Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much, Mr. Paradiso, for coming down. I know you're testifying on your own behalf, but as a commissioner, do you receive notice of a proposed wind turbine project when somebody applies at the at the PUCO? And then what process do you follow as a commissioner to try to make sure members of your community know that a project has been proposed?
Okay, Mr. Chairman.
Please proceed.
As long as I've been commissioner, we have not received any new applications, but we are briefed ongoing of all the activity in our area from the current projects that are going. And as a county, our prosecutor represents us in this process, so we are constantly in contact with our prosecutor who informs us of activity.
Follow up, Mr. Chair.
Please.
So the Power Siting Public Utilities Commission is supposed to notify local officials about a potential siting. If it's not the commission, is it city council, or what local entity is receiving this information if the county,
Within our county?
is not?
I'm not sure exactly how it comes in, but I get it from our prosecutor.
Okay.
Yes. I'm not aware of email directly that I would get.
Follow up, Mr. Chair.
Please.
So as a commissioner, is there anything you can do locally to prohibit such projects, or does the Power Siting Board and the Public Utility Commission outweigh your authority to maybe hold up permits and that sort of thing for a project that residents might not want?
Thank you, Senator. We have very limited authority locally, and that's what's frustrating. So we do what we can. We own the airport. We intervene when we can. We support our citizens. But I think and know that SB 234 would bring that decision back to our townships, and the people could decide whether you're pro or anti-wind. I work for the people, so if the people want it, I'm good with that. But
Thank
they
you,
have
Mr.
no
Chair.
say.
Thank you. Senator McCauley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Commissioner, for being here. Kind of piggybacking off of Senator Williams' question, my understanding, and you correct me if I'm wrong, is that the only decision, official decision that gets to be made by the county commissioners in a wind project is whether or not to grant an agreement for payment in lieu of taxes. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
Senator.
Which,
Thank you.
if it's not granted, is not an express prohibition on the project proceeding, correct?
Senator.
Please.
Chairman. That's correct.
Do you know, sorry, Chairman, if I may,
Yes.
do you know of other counties or other projects across the state, and I'm sure maybe some of the other witnesses might touch on this, that are proceeding without a pilot agreement, which essentially would render the argument that truly there is no necessity for any local government to weigh in on any of this for any of these projects to proceed?
Mr.
Please.
Chairman. Seneca County has taken the position on all future projects that we do not want to be part of the pilot. So up until mid-year last year, Seneca County was under the rules of the pilot, but the commissioners have voted going forward any new submissions, we would not be, we don't want to be part of the pilot. As far as neighboring counties, I'm not aware of any position there just regarding the pilot.
Senator Burke.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And again, down the same train of thought that my colleague talked about, even in terms of notification, and one of the issues that we've seen with this is leaseholders, right, are acquired by whoever's going to do the project, and the project's put together before it ends up at the PUCO. So it's safe to assume that leaseholders are probably in favor of a wind project, and folks like yourself or neighbors thereof may actually be unaware of this project coming to fruition until it is actually put in front of the PUCO, because obviously it doesn't exist, so your reaction time is somewhat delayed. Is that kind of how the process works from what you've seen?
Mr. Chairman.
Please.
Yes, Senator, that's exactly what's happening. And again, I would encourage the committee to, I know you have a lot of testimony, over 300 submitted here. I would encourage you to pull out and maybe reread the Gerald and Paula Wilbert and Doug and Kathy Scheidler testimony, and I think it is spot on as to the way that process has been conducted. And you're absolutely correct. The majority of the people are unaware of that. And even when they become aware, sometimes it's not what they thought it was.
And one follow-up, if I could, Mr. Chairman.
Please do.
And again, having reflected back on the nuclear bill that we did last year, where nuclear energy currently generates approximately 10 times a reliable source of energy as wind does in our state. But yet, a nuclear power plant, in your own testimony, impacts physically, at least by its geographic location, a nominal amount of property owners. This project, and again, looking at the prior witness's map, impacts a voluminous amount of property owners, and is probably one of the contagion reasons why this issue is so cantankerous. Is that, again, another fair assessment of a evaluation from source to source?
Yes, sir. You're spot on. Thank you.
Thank you.
Senator O'Brien.
Thank you, and thank you for your testimony. Is one of the big concerns for you the local control factor? Is that the primary, giving the people the voice and the ability to say, we want this in our community or we don't?
Please.
Yes, and that's really where I'm speaking from, is 234, and that's what that would do. Yes.
Follow up. And I can sympathize with you because in my district, we have injection wells, and they have caused not just spills, but seismic activity that could affect thousands of people. And we're kind of in the same boat, and it's the local control that's the concerning part, and that's probably more of a statement than, but I sympathize and understand we should give the people a choice. So
I
thank
think
you
your
for your
statement
testimony.
would be agreed to by the witness.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you very much for traveling here. Thank you for your testimony. I would call to the podium Julia Johnson, please.
Chairman Wilson, Vice Chairman McCauley, and Ranking Member Williams, members of the committee, my name is Julie Johnson, and I am here in support of Senate Bill 234. The purpose of zoning is to separate incompatible uses, and an industrial wind turbine is a power plant with blades rotating at about 200 miles an hour, 600 feet in the air. They can be seen from 30 miles away, and at night their blinking red lights obliterate the night sky. They belong in areas zoned for industry and not in rural residential areas. I believe there's a prohibition in Ohio against building a home in an area zoned for industrial use. So why should it be lawful to place an industrial facility in a rural residential area? Taxpaying Ohioans in Northwest Ohio have lost the right to the protection of zoning. Senate Bill 234 will give them the power to choose whether or not they would want to relinquish that right. Contracts to lease land for wind turbines include provisions for a landowner to waive specified adverse impacts. These are in the contracts, these waivers. They include the adverse impacts of noise, moving shadows, ice throw, vibrations, and other things. Abutting property owners may grant easements to also waive these things, and they're euphemistically called good neighbor agreements. They allow the adverse impacts to be imposed on the neighboring property, and more often than not, the purpose of a good neighbor agreement is just to allow the neighboring property to meet the setback threshold. But the adverse impacts are a secondary consideration. And beyond that the threshold, they're not addressed. And the leases and easements generally bar the landowner from complaining about these unforeseen impacts. We call them gag order provisions. An example would be in the area of noise. It's generally accepted that an increase in the level of noise of 5 decibels above background is noticeable and is annoying. Above that, the annoyance increases. In the application phase for wind development, the developer measures the background noise levels on properties of about 10 or so selected leaseholders, selected by the developer. Across the footprint of the project footprint, which could be more than 50 square miles. The results are then averaged, and the Power Siting Board approves that averaged baseline noise level and authorizes noise to rise a maximum of 5 decibels above that average. The Power Siting Board makes no independent assessment of the noise levels, the baseline noise levels. They don't have the competence, they don't have the skills. They rely completely on the developer. They just accept whatever they say of average noise levels across, think of that, 50 square miles. The protocol completely disregards the rural resident who may reside in a very quiet area and who almost certainly will experience more than a 5 decibel increase in noise, which will cause a high degree of annoyance. If that resident is in the impacted township, but neither inside the footprint nor abutting it, that resident has no standing to intervene or have his concerns addressed during the application approval process at the Power Siting Board. Under my example, the rural resident residing in the township where the industrial wind development will be sited is denied both the protection of zoning and the possible protection of conditions imposed by the Ohio Power Siting Board. One other point I'd like to make today concerns the cost and benefit of hosting an industrial wind turbine in the community. The wind industry claims local economic benefit from lease payments to landowners, yet we find that in most of the Ohio projects, an average of 30% of the turbines are on land owned by absentee landowners. They don't live in the township, they may not live in the county, and many of them do not live in the state. How is it that people who do not live in the community can impact the character of the community for generations and drain the value from its residents? By giving the power of a referendum to local voters, that unfair influence of absentee landowners is negated. Some costs can be quantified and others cannot. Boston University conducted a study to quantify the economic contribution of bats to add the agricultural community. Bats eat meaningful quantities of insects and help the farmer reduce the need for pesticides. This is a good environmental outcome, but it's also an important financial contribution. The Boston University study assigns a value of $74 per crop acre in avoided pesticide costs for bats. In Champaign County, my home, the Boston University estimates the cost could equal more than $12 million in annual pesticide costs for farmers. In Seneca County, they estimate the cost could exceed $16 million per year. Likewise, the possible risk to aerial spraying is not accounted for when considering the cost versus benefit of an industrial wind project. The National Agricultural Aviation Association in an advertisement states, aerial spraying or crop dusting gets more challenging with every wind turbine erected in America's farmland. Without careful consideration in their placement, farmers could lose the option and the advantage of aerial spraying. Agricultural aircraft can treat large areas of land quickly and safely, and may be the only option for treating crops when wet fields, which we've had a lot of, rolling terrain or dense crop foliage exists. Landowners are being asked to make crucial decisions that will impact farmers and their neighbors for years to come. Improper wind turbine siting may negatively affect aerial applicators, emergency medical flights, pipeline patrols, and other low-flying aircraft. Be sure to consider all the facts before greenlighting a wind energy installation on your land. And that's the National Agricultural Aviation Association. These examples are just two illustrations of the costs that are borne by the larger community beyond the boundary lines of a leased property or the footprint of a wind development. Industrial wind poses costs on the broader community, while the benefits accrue more specifically to the landowner who often lives outside the county or the state. It should be up to those who bear the cost to determine whether the benefits are sufficient to offset those costs. I hope my examples demonstrate why wind development is very different from other power generation, why it is broadly intrusive. Its spinning blades and blinking lights are a 24/7 aggravation and distraction that diminish the local community. And to add insult to injury, the intermittency and inefficiency of wind pales in comparison to any other source of energy. Wind should not enjoy the benefits accorded to baseline load providers. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Appreciate you traveling here and giving that to us. Any questions from the committee?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Johnson, thank you so much for your testimony. I think you begin to elucidate on this issue, but could you offer specific recommendations from your perspective regarding the residents' input in the middle of the power siting board's process instead of at the end?
Chairman Wilson, Senator Craig, are you asking me if there might be a place other than at the end of the process where there could be some
input? Right, yes.
I probably have a whole list of things, but that may not discreetly not be one versus another, but there may be a collection of actions. For instance, it may be an improvement if there was a community notice and a presentation by a developer prior to the first lease being signed in a community, so that the community may be educated about what this is. I would say that by the same token that the community should have the opportunity to present the other side prior to a lease being signed. I think right at the beginning, if you have people that know what they're getting into, because most of the time they don't, many of the people that have signed leases are elderly. They do not understand what they're signing. They do not know what they have done. And when their heirs find out after they've died, they're horrified. So that would be maybe one place, but I don't think that anything really nothing trumps having the local communities give a vote.
Thank you very
Thank you.
much.
Thank you,
very
Senator
much,
McCauley.
Thank you, Mr.
Thank you, Chairman Wilson. Thank you for being here. From talking with you previously, you do an extensive amount of research, not only in the effect of this in Ohio, but also in other states, correct?
Yes.
So one of my questions concerns, we had one of the previous witnesses bring up local control in the other states, especially in our bordering states. Are you aware that local control has completely killed any wind development in any of those states, or has it simply just been another tool in the toolbox for the locals to actually exercise some authority?
Chairman Wilson, Senator McCauley, I would say it's another tool. If we look at Indiana, which has local control, local zoning, there are counties in Indiana that are very supportive of wind. Benton County, White County are two examples. And there's an extraordinary amount of wind development that have occurred there. There are other counties that have banned them entirely. Allen County, which is where Fort Wayne is, which borders Ohio, has banned them completely. Mm-hmm. So it doesn't preclude wind development, and there is a lot of wind development in Indiana. Almost every state surrounding Ohio has the same protocol.
One more follow-up.
Please.
Thank you. And a question I asked a previous witness, and I'm sure you'll know the answer. Are there other projects in other counties other than Seneca that are proceeding with their projects without a pilot, a payment in lieu of taxes agreement in place? And was that something that ever happened 3 or 4 or 5 years ago? Is this something that's going to begin happening with far more frequency, if that's the case?
There's a project that covers Logan and Hardin County. The Hardin County granted pilot for the project. Logan County did not. Logan County's townships, I think, adopted resolutions in opposition to the project. And the developer, I think it's NOG, is proceeding to go forward in Logan County despite no pilot.
Thank you. Any other questions? Senator Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks for your testimony. Is there anything that you know of in state law that prohibits a particular county from putting an initiative on the ballot to just ban wind turbines in that locality specifically? And if there is not, is that something you all have tried to do?
Chairman Wilson, Senator Williams, what you are saying would be a provision accorded in zoning. Today in Ohio, if the township passes a zoning law the right of referendum exists for the citizens. But because all zoning was preempted for wind development in Ohio, that right of referendum does not exist. So there can be no referendum in any county in Ohio.
Any other questions? Thank you very much for your testimony.
Thank you.
Before I call up the next witness, I will tell you that we were scheduled to go to 11, but I want y'all to have your say. We have now been extended to 12, but 12 will be a hard stop. That doesn't mean that we can't adjourn and reconvene, but that will have you maybe later this afternoon or this evening coming back. I say that because we have witnesses to go, but please be as concise as you can with your testimony so that everybody gets to be heard. And Michael Parker, would you please come to the podium next? Welcome. Please proceed when ready.
Thank you. Chairman Wilson, Vice Chairman McCauley, Ranking Member Williams, and members of the committee. My name is Michael Parker. I am an Oxford Township trustee from Erie County in my 4th term, and I'm also the past president and current vice president of the Erie County Township Association. I am a lifelong resident of Erie County. I wish to thank you for allowing me to be here personally to be proponent for the Senate Bill 234. It's always good to put eyes on people. Upon completion, I wish to read you a short letter expressing support of the bill that we sent to the Ohio Township Association for action. It was also copied to all the sponsors. Upon completion of the reading of the letter, I will make some brief explanatory comments and conclude with a request for questions. However, before proceeding to the letter, a little background information on Erie County and the Apex Emerson Creek project is in order. Erie County has 9 townships with a county seat in Sandusky. 2 of the 9 townships in Erie County are directly impacted by the Emerson Creek Wind Project, Oxford and Groton. The original proposal for the project was 11 turbines in Oxford and 14 turbines in Groton. Groton and Oxford townships each have 6 miles square. Both have approximately 1,100 residents with homes interspersed through the community. All townships in Erie County are zoned, and most of the townships are primarily zoned ag residential, the exception being Perkins Township, and I'll get to that later. Perkins and Oxford townships jointly share NASA Plumbrook Station, where the Orion project is being tested within the bounds of Oxford Township. Perkins is immediately to the north and adjacent to Oxford Township, and it has become largely residential with a booming service and mercantile industry having major income from tourism. Fortunately, to help make up for the loss of income from industry, tourism has become the mainstay of the economy due to the attraction of Lake Erie, Sandusky Bay, the islands, and of course Cedar Point. I'll proceed to the letter that we sent to the Township Association. It's from Erie County Township Association. It's to the Board of Directors for the Ohio Township Association. And it also was CC'd to all the sponsors of both bills. At a regular meeting of the Erie County Township Association held on 12 December 2019, with a majority of members present, the Erie County Township Association voted unanimously to request the Ohio Township Association to carefully review and consider public backing of the bills. And then I described the content of the bills and that they also enacted a new section of the revised code to include safety specifications. The important and key points of these bills are summed up in 2 words: safety and vote. The Erie County Township Association endorses these 2 bills because they put township residents' safety and voice in government foremost in regard to industrial wind farm projects that can have a large impact on them and their community. Members also realize that by supporting the bill, they are not endorsing or rejecting industrial wind farm projects, but are simply improving safety standards and constituents' voice in government. Our membership, as typical of most township official bodies, firmly believes that the government closest to the people has the best feel for the interests of its voters, and these two bills have the core interests of the voters and local control as their theme. For these reasons, we respectfully requested their support, and it was signed by Ryan Brown, the president, and myself. Now, getting back to summarize, as you can see, the Erie County Township Association firmly supports the bills. All of Erie County townships adopted zoning laws decades ago. Control of zoning continues through the election of trustees and their appointment of members to the zoning appeals boards. It just seems appropriate to extend that control to projects of large geographic impact. As I had reviewed the bills and composed the letter, it was easy to see that the bills have the best interests of Ohio residents at heart. Those being the right to vote on projects of such large geographic magnitude and impact, and 2, safety. The referendum portion of the bill should be the easiest to sell to Ohioans. Some counties and townships may be overwhelmingly in favor of wind energy projects, as they have few alternative means for income. And some counties and townships, such as in Erie County, may vote entirely differently due to the adverse impact on property values and other means of income, such as tourism. In either case, it is in the best interest of the people to allow them to vote as they see fit. In addition, not to underplay the safety aspect of the bills, as a nuclear power plant operator, engineer, and executive for 38 years, I personally understand the aspects of safety in regard to safety limits, legal limits, margins of safety, and manufacturer recommended limits on safety. Though harder to explain to the public and arguably more contentious among technical people, the bills will increase the margin for safety and make that margin flexible for the long term, and should thus be passed for those reasons also. Now, I would add that the Township Association did discuss this letter. They tabled it for the conference. They discussed it on a conference call of 19 people, and that's a little tough. So they're waiting for the conference next week to follow up on action. Personally, I would expect they would pass it. It may not be unanimous, but that's my personal opinion. But it will be acted on next week in any case. And I would thank you for your consideration and patience in listening. And I'm ready for questions if you have any, Mr. Chairman.
Right. Well, thank you so much for your travels here and for your testimony to bring us up to speed on these initiatives. Any questions? Senator Burke?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And just one question of the commissioner. And again, maybe this shows, I think, your open-mindedness, and correct me if I'm wrong. I mean, we're talking about a land-based wind project in that area of the state, but yet I don't think one could define Erie County as anti-wind, because wasn't Erie County also open to discussions around putting wind turbines on the lake itself? Is that, at least from what I can see?
I cannot recall that far back, but I can, if I may, Mr. Chairman.
Please.
Would like to address something in that same area that was not completely answered. As far as Huron County and Erie County and the pilot part, they both, in Erie County, the commissioners did hold a meeting, public meeting, and they voted at that meeting, and it was specific to the pilot. They voted at that meeting unanimously to not accept the pilot. And they were pretty in lockstep with the two township trustee boards, Groton and Oxford, in not being in favor of that. Huron County initially was in favor of the pilot and rescinded that, and they're no longer in favor of it. But I cannot recall, sir, if Erie County was in favor of the wind projects in the lake initially. That board has changed considerably since then.
Just a follow-up, if I could, Mr.
Please.
Chairman. But I guess my point is, I don't think one could define Erie County as being closed-minded on the subject. Is that a reasonable approach?
That's a reasonable assumption, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, sir. Thank you,
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman.
Thank you for your testimony.
You're welcome, sir.
Walt Poffenbaugh, I hope I didn't totally destroy that, Walt.
Sir, you did not.
You may proceed when ready.
Thank you, sir. Chairman Wilson, Vice Chairman McCauley, Ranking Member Williams, and members of the committee, my name is Walt Poffenbaugh. I live in Norwich Township in Huron County. My family moved to rural Huron County 21 years ago after the Highway Patrol sent me there to be the post commander of the Norwalk Post. I retired from that position several years ago. Our residence is in the footprint of the Emerson Creek Industrial Wind Turbine Project proposed for Erie and Huron counties. I would like to speak to you all today on the matter of cumulative effect. 12 years ago, the National Research Council of the National Academies of Science published a 376-page resource compendium entitled Environmental Impacts of Wind Energy Projects. The purpose of this report was to assist policymakers in the assessment of impacts from industrial wind and inform both siting and operational decisions. Since 2007, decision makers have been encouraged to ask, and I quote, "How will cumulative effects be assessed, and what will be included in that assessment, such as effects of wind energy installations, or of all other electricity generators, or of all other anthropogenic impacts on the area," unquote. So my comments this morning will primarily address the cumulative impact of the Seneca Wind, Republic Wind, and Emerson Creek Wind projects, as well as 3 potential future projects in the immediate area, which are known as Honey Creek, Buck Springs, and Emerson West. It is my opinion that it is impossible to only discuss Emerson Creek Wind without also taking into account the impact of the other currently pending projects. Republic Wind, Seneca Wind, and Emerson Creek combined encompass 130,378 acres in portions of 4 adjacent counties in northwest Ohio. 130,378 acres translates to 203 square miles. I know it's difficult to wrap your head around just how big 203 square miles is. So allow me to provide a reference that I think you can all appreciate. The city of Columbus, which I imagine all of you are familiar with, we're here today, covers 212 square miles. The sprawling city, which is our state capital, is just 9 square miles smaller, or 9 square miles larger than the area that is going to be used for the 3 proposed projects currently pending in front of the Power Siting Board. That's an area 3 miles by 3 miles. Now, this doesn't even include the 3 additional projects that are in various stages of development, in which no applications have yet been filed. So imagine an industrial wind turbine area containing turbines 650 plus feet tall in an area the size of the city of Columbus, covering a portion of 4 counties. Please remember, this is just the area the wind developers need currently for the 3 currently proposed projects. Additional projects would obviously mean that they would encroach on even more property and more land. So I've included a high-resolution map in my presentation. It's on page 2. I direct your attention to figure 1. You'll notice that this map has a lot of different colored dots on it. Those dots represent the location of turbines by GPS coordinates that the wind developers had to file with the Federal Aviation Administration. On the map, you will see the blue dots off on the right-hand side are the Emerson Creek proposed turbine locations. That's in Erie and Huron County. To the left of that are the red dots, which are the Republic Wind proposed project locations. Below that, the large number of yellow dots are the Seneca Wind proposed turbine locations. Those are the three projects that are currently being considered by the Power Siting Board. And then down at the bottom of the map, covering southern Seneca and into Crawford County, are the brown dots, which are the proposed turbine locations for the Honey Creek project. Now, as you can see, when the wind developers start to talk about these projects, they like to talk about them in little bitty bites. Each project is separate. Each project meets its own criteria, and they like to keep it that way. But by just looking at this map, when I say cumulative effect and the impact of one project right beside another one, lined right up with the next one, that's what we're looking at. That's what I mean by cumulative effect. And the area of the yellow, blue, and red dots is 9 square miles smaller than the city of Columbus. Just to put that in reference. So we talk about the placement of the turbines that are currently in the application phase. Seneca Wind will encompass 56,900 acres. That's 88.9 square miles. There are 77 turbines proposed with a nameplate generating capacity of 212 megawatts. And if you do the math, that comes out to 1.15 square miles per turbine. A square mile is 640 acres. In the Republic Wind project, and this information, folks, by the way, comes straight from the applications on file at the Power Siting Board. I didn't make these figures up. These are the wind developers' figures that they filed with the state. In the Republic Wind project, it encompasses 32,478 miles, or acres, I'm sorry. Square miles is 50.74. They propose around 50 turbines with a 200 megawatt nameplate generating capacity. That's one turbine every, or 1.01 square mile for every turbine. And in the Emerson Creek project, 41,000 acres, 64.06 square miles, 62 turbines, 297 generating capacity, and the square miles per turbine is 1.03. The wind developers have consistently referred to the area around all of these projects as lightly populated and primarily rural. The figures compiled by the Ohio Developmental Service Agency and used in the wind developers' own applications are included in the middle table on page 3 of my presentation. I won't go through those line by line, but they're there for you in the interest of time. Now, these figures here, especially the population density, don't really mean anything unless you compare them to something. And so let's compare the 3 counties in Ohio that currently have industrial wind turbine projects: Hardin, Paulding, and Van Wert. That's the table that's at the bottom of page 3. You have that in front of you. So what we gain from this is that the 3 listed counties in Ohio with industrial wind turbines currently operating, which are Hardin, Van Wert, and Paulding, have a combined population of between all 3 counties of 80,706 people, an average population density of 60 people per square mile. The 3 counties with the majority of wind turbine placements in the proposed Seneca Wind, Republic Wind, and Emerson Creek Wind projects have a combined population of 554 people, and average population density of 172 people per square mile. There are over twice as many people and nearly triple the population density in Seneca, Erie, and Huron County when you compare that to Hardin, Van Wert, and Paulding County. Now, despite the widespread availability of the National Research Council's report that I mentioned earlier, neither the Ohio Power Siting Board nor the legislature has ever recognized or adopted rules for cumulative impact. Now the crisis is upon us. This concentration of industrial wind projects is a classic example of how the cumulative impact will overburden an area. But the point is that there is nothing the Ohio Power Siting Board can do to save our area. The OPSB evaluates each project on a discrete basis and not in context of other wind developers, as I have pointed out before. If each developer can meet the requirements for their particular project, the community is helpless, and the Power Siting Board will approve it. It's been suggested by some legislators that Senate Bill 234 is redundant given the rigorous process of evaluation and approval by the OPSB. Clearly, this is not so. Instead, the ability to address cumulative impact is a giant gaping hole in Ohio's regulatory siting provisions. Senate Bill 234 fills that gap. By giving the right of referendum to impacted voters, the people can decide when enough is enough. Denying that right condemns us to an unthinkable future. The developers of these projects are attempting to insert an industrial-sized electric generating plant nearly the size of the city of Columbus into an area home to many Ohioans. I doubt any other industry could propose locating such a facility that large in any area of Ohio, which is as big as Columbus, and not have people resistant to the idea. The area of Ohio is densely populated area, our area, when compared with the areas where smaller and fewer turbines are currently operating in this state. I greatly appreciate the opportunity to speak with you today. My wife and I, and several hundred of our like-minded neighbors, urge you to adopt Senate Bill 234.
Thank you. Thank you for your testimony, and thank you for all the research that you did. Other questions? Thank you for your testimony. Before I call up the next witness, I want to tell you where we are and what's going on. I'm going to lose several committee members to higher education at 11:30 because they have a vote there. We're going to keep going. But at 12, as I said earlier, I have a hard stop until after session because of things that are committed to. I will not adjourn if you're not all done, and I will recess. But that recess, the earliest we could come back would be after session, which is probably in the 3 o'clock time range. So I say that to you because you certainly help those others that are testifying if we can keep it moving. But I will not cut anybody off of their testimony. So Jeremy Kitson, please come to the podium.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Chairman Wilson, Vice Chairman McCauley, Ranking Member Williams, and members of the committee. My name is Jeremy Kitson, and I'm a rural resident of Harrison Township of Van Wert County, Ohio. I testify today in strong support of Senate Bill 234, allowing townships the right to gather signatures and hold referendums on wind projects. My community has been through a lot regarding wind energy, and we currently host the largest industrial wind project in the state, the Blue Creek Project. This bill affirms 3 key things Ohioans in the rural areas overwhelmingly support: equitable property rights for all, true local control, and the protection of our huge capital investment in our homes. I would like to focus my remarks on the issue of property value. I really don't think anyone needs a lot of studies because common sense could serve just as well. Exhibit A to my testimony are photos of wind turbines which are 1,000 feet or more from homes. Just looking at these photos, one could easily conclude that the value of the home is likely to be less than what was prior to wind development. One might also conclude that there is little likelihood the homes will appreciate in value at rate equal to homes in other areas. Numerous studies prove that homes in or near the footprint of an industrial wind project lose value. The data from such studies estimate a 20 to 40% depreciation. In Van Wert County, an extensive analysis was done by collecting home sales from the Van Wert County Auditor's website. The data includes home sales from two different periods, 2006 to 2011 and 2006 to 2018. The first period was established as a period when people began to know an industrial wind project would be built, and the second is the overall time frame to date through 2018. Sales were analyzed for Union Township, the only entire township in the Blue Creek project, against overall county data as a comparison. If you look into the document Exhibit B, you can clearly see home devaluation in Union Township of almost 10% when compared to the rest of the county. The rest of Van Wert County home sales appear to be essentially stable, where it is clear the sales in Union Township show a loss since the construction and operation of Blue Creek. When analyzing that on a larger scale, how much tangible property tax has fallen due to this project? Are those devaluations overall offset by the annual pilot payment the county receives from Blue Creek? This is my second major concern. Exhibit C of my testimony is intended to show you what choice a home buyer is likely to make when choosing to buy a home in a community with wind turbines versus a community without wind turbines. My example is the manager of the Blue Creek Wind Farm in Van Wert, who chose to live 30 miles away in Fort Wayne, Indiana, rather than in Van Wert County. Fort Wayne is in Allen County, where local government has banned all industrial wind turbines. I think the Blue Creek manager's choice of where to live and raise his family is one of the best arguments supporting the fact that industrial wind developments are incompatible land use in a rural residential community. He voted with his feet while the rest of us are stuck without the right of referendum that would be granted in Senate Bill 234. Our home is a part of our retirement and nest egg. We have significant equity in our home. Currently, our equity is 43% over the value. We are not prepared to take a property and home value hit that dramatically affects our future retirement. I have seen extensive studies on property values and the relation to industrial scale wind. These cited sources have already been sent to Representatives Riedel and Reinecke. There are many studies that confirm what this Van Wert data is telling us. Wind turbines do adversely affect property values. And I understand that in the Ohio House, Representative Weinstein has referenced a significant property value study conducted by Ben Hohen for the Lawrence Berkeley Lab. In referencing this report, the representative has taken the position that proximity to industrial wind turbines has no real impact on home values. In that study, there was more than 50,000 homes identified for data collection in 27 counties in 9 states. The homes were within 10 miles of 67 different wind developments, and 1,198 of the sales studied were within 1 mile of a turbine. That only represents 2% of the entire data set. So it's not any hard thing to believe that Hohen maybe didn't find any statistical impact on home values when they're only looking at 2% within a mile of a turbine. Notwithstanding, Hohen was recorded in an interview where he also said the following, and I quote, "You know, we are very cautious about what happens close to the turbines. We really don't know what's going on there. For example, 1,250 feet from a turbine. I spoke in Illinois about this. You might know about a property value guarantee. It's a dicey situation and complicated, but I think homes that are very close, there's just too much unknown right now, and that seems reasonable. I think one of the things that often happens is that when developers put our report forward and say, look, property values aren't affected, and that's not what we would say specifically. On the other hand, they have little ground to stand on if they say we won't guarantee that. I think for homes that are close, we have a lot more ambiguity and real issues. If we are talking about views, that's one thing. If we are hearing it or shadow flicker that might be really regular, the kind of things that happen at night," end quote. So I just go back to using common sense and the reasoning for zoning to separate incompatible uses. Enjoying a quality life in a rural residential community is incompatible with living inside of an industrial power plant. You really don't need a fancy study to demonstrate that. And if a community believes the benefits outweigh the cost, so be it. By giving the people the right of referendum, people will be much more willing to accept the trade-off if the voters want wind development. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Appreciate your testimony. Are there any questions from the committee? Thank you. We will call Kevin Ledet, please, to the podium. How'd I do?
My name is Kevin Ledet. I'm from Huron County, Ohio. Chairman Wilson, Vice Chairman McCauley, Ranking Member Williams, the members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to provide oral testimony in support of Senate Bill 234. I would like to stress the need for local referendum opportunity for townships slated to host approved wind projects. This bill is important for safety, well-being, and protection of Ohio citizens who find themselves inside or near the footprint of an industrial wind project. I will be referencing Greenwich Wind Park, also known as Crossroads Wind Power. This wind project has been approved by the Power Siting Board for Greenwich Township, Huron County, Ohio, which is part of the 13th House Senate District, represented by Senator Nathan Manning, who is a co-sponsor of this bill, and I thank him. My wife and I have been residents of Greenwich Township for over 43 years. The Greenwich Wind Project has been granted a certificate by OPSB for the construction of a wind project up to 60 megawatts, output consisting of up to 25 turbines. These turbines will be 490 feet tall. There are 29 participating property owners that have signed leases and 124 non-participating adjacent property owners in this project. What is incredible to me is that 13 of the 25 turbines are to be placed on property property placed on land that belongs to absentee landowners, people that do not live in the community. More astonishing is that 11 of these 13 turbines are to be placed on land that is owned by foreign investors from Germany. What this means is that 52% of the turbines for this project will be placed on land that belongs to people who don't live in Greenwich Township. The outcome of this is that people who don't live here have the ability to make devastating impact on the people that do live here. As of this moment, communities like Greenwich Township have had no recourse to have their voices truly heard. This bill, Senate Bill 234, by granting the right of local referendum, will give the members of the affected township the right to vote. The ability to vote yes or no on a project that will directly affect them. I've heard developers say how much money they will bring into the local community with lease payments. If 52% of the turbines are located on absentee landowners, then 52% of these lease payments don't stay in the community. I don't know how many absentee landowners are in the other project footprints, but I know Greenwich is not an exception. The 29 participating property owners are contrasted against a group of 124 non-participating adjacent property owners that were defined by the developer WinLab. We took a survey of the 124 non-participating adjacent property owners back in 2014. This survey with signatures can be found on the OPSB website in the public comment section. There were 75 non-participating adjacent property owners that responded. 73 out of the 75 are against the project, 97% against the project. If you concede that the 29 participating property owners are still for the project, that translates to 31 for and 73 against, roughly 70%. How can such numbers be overlooked? Rather easily, when they aren't represented. We know that the Greenwich Wind Project will not be affected by this bill because it has already been issued a certificate. But if the developer has to reapply, wishes to modify, or if any other development comes to Greenwich Township, we will have a more level playing field. The passage of this bill will correct the injustice of preempting our local zoning and taking away our right to determine the character of our own community. Going forward, this injustice will be rectified in the truly American way, the ballot. I've also heard the argument that a payment in lieu of taxes pilot is a means of local control. I beg to differ with that. Greenwich Township's trustees unanimously denied the pilot to Swift Current, and they said they are still going to build. Early on in Apex Emerson Creek project in Huron and Erie counties,
The developer said they will not build without a pilot. Huron County Commissioners passed a resolution stating that when Apex completes all the necessary paperwork, they will grant Apex Emerson Creek a pilot. After that, the community got involved with the commissioners and overwhelmingly sought to have this resolution rescinded. The Erie County Commissioners later that year denied Apex a pilot for the portion of Emerson Creek that was to be built in their county. The Huron County Commissioners, after studying the project further, rescinded the resolution about the pilot. Later that month, the Huron County Commissioners denied the pilot for Emerson Creek. The developer Apex now says they will proceed without the pilot. Enough said about a pilot being a means of local control. The only thing a pilot controls by lessening is the true revenue a community should get from a project. My closing thought on this matter: early in the Greenwich project and in many meetings with Apex at the Huron County Commissioner's office, the developers often made the remarks about how well they had been received in the respective communities, how they are being transparent, and the communities are welcomed in the projects, or the communities are welcoming for the projects. If that is truly the case, then why is the wind industry so dead set against the host community having the right to vote on the issue? If that is truly the case, then passage of Senate Bill 234 would allow the local community an opportunity to validate what the wind developers have been telling you and the public for years. I see no harm in that. Thank you.
And thank you very much for your testimony. Are there any questions? Okay, at this point in time, I will call Dennis Schreiner. Dennis, did I do all right on your name?
Yes, Chairman. Chairman Wilson, Vice Chairman Cawley, Ranking Member Williams, and members of the committee. My name is Dennis Schreiner. I reside in Erie County, and I am a budding property owner to the proposed Emerson Creek Wind Farm. I'm here to provide support for House Bill 234 and would like to speak to the provision of giving impacted communities a voice in the development of wind projects. Not all areas or townships are so keen on the development of an industrial wind farm. Only the people who will be directly affected can accurately assess the impact and determine whether or not the risks outweigh the proposed benefits. In order to be brief, if you refer to my testimony, I just have some bullets here, and I'll go address those and then talk about it. Non-leaseholder residents are notified late in the process. Earlier, you had a question about when notifications occur, whatever. The wind company generally gets leases, puts together a plan, puts that proposed plan out, has a public meeting. That report is accepted, and within 60 days, the Ohio Power Siting Board accepts the application as being complete. Otherwise, they make corrections, and that starts the clock. Once that clock is started, then the commissioners are notified, and they have 60 days to kind of vote on whether they have a pilot or no pilot. So in the case of Emerson Creek, the wind developers had been working on the project for around 10 years under a kind of a gag order that we were all surprised when the public meeting was announced. And then the clock starts that we have 60 days to then converse with our commissioners as to whether to approve or not approve a payment in lieu of taxes or a tax abatement for the project. The Ohio Power Siting Board itself, its process requires a very quick turnaround with respect for the time for local resident input. And the other amazing thing is landowners and those who abut the footprint but are not inside of it lack standing to intervene. So when we do get our voice, we find out unless you are in the project area, which is carefully carved out around leaseholders, or unless your property touches that line, you cannot get council to have a voice in the process. And we also told testimony, in fact, was that the wind company touts there is local input because you have a vote on pilot, no pilot, and that if there is no tax abatement, they're not going to go forward with the project. Well, we found out that was less than genuine in its application. Working residents often cannot attend county commissioner meetings, Ohio Power Siting Board hearings, and meetings such as this during core working hours because their vacation time is primarily taken for personal things, health reasons, vacations, things like that. And they are not as fortunate as myself to be able to come down here and talk to you. So it is in that spirit, I offer 333 letters that are individually written by my friends, families, and people that I had contacted through social media to provide written testimony. These are not petitions. These are not form letters. These are individually written letters from 330 people throughout the state. It isn't all just in the 4 counties. We've got some things from a absentee landowner in New York. We also have some stuff from Lucas County down to Champaign County and around the state. But it's primarily Erie, Huron, and Seneca County that the letters are from. I had sent those to you earlier, and they have been put on your site as a
Yes, they have all been uploaded to our site and are available to not only all members of the committee, but also they will be available by the time we get to any vote to every senator to consider when they consider what their vote will be.
I sure thank you for my interaction with your staff and making sure that happened. I'm very appreciative of that. Local input at any meaningful level requires securing an attorney at considerable expense that is not reimbursed in any way. This isn't a kind of hearing that if you win the case, lose the case, that determines who pays for this. Those of us that are objecting to wind farms have to secure an attorney, and then only if we are within the footprint or abut the footprint can we have standing in the case to intervene, which is an amazingly small number of the thousands of people that are affected. Township trustees and county commissioners can voice opposition on behalf of the residents, but opposition of local officials cannot be acted upon by the Ohio Power Siting Board as a basis of denial. I have had numerous talks with members of the Ohio Power Siting Board, the chairman of the PUCO, to ask, what can I do, because I have every elected official I can get a hold of that say they are not for this project to proceed. And he said, that lacks basis in the current process. Unless you can find a technical issue with the 7 criteria that apply, the project will be approved. So that is the case where we're supporting your Senate Bill 234 as introduced by Senator McCauley, because we do need a voice and we don't have it any other way. In evaluating the application for a wind farm, the de facto standard is the wind company experts are right. Local residents must prove them wrong, unsafe, or whatever. If you look at the transcripts from the hearing of the Republic Wind adjudicatory hearing, you will see that the Ohio Power Siting Board, along with the wind developer, has experts that are ill-equipped to answer the questions presented to them. So why are we targeting wind farms? They have a very low power density. A very, very conservative figure is 20,000 acres plus for 300 megawatts of electrical energy. The movement of blades and the flashing of night lights makes them impossible to ignore. They affect drivers, wildlife, and residents. As you well know, in the area that I'm at, it's 250 square miles that's affected. And the other thing that we haven't heard about is the significant source of electromagnetic interference and radio frequency interference that these projects bring. One of my big farmer landowners, since we're going to have these 7,000 horsepower machines, 400 feet in the air, has spent considerable amount of money for autonomous driving tractors and other farm equipment. And his manufacturer said, well, I hope they're more than 4 miles away from you because we don't know how well your system's going to work. And He's very, very concerned, and in the Ohio Power Siting Board process, unless you're a registered FCC license, you aren't evaluated in their electromagnetic interference, radio frequency interference thing, along with people that use walkie-talkies, commercial radios, and things like that. I thank you very much for the opportunity to testify and would entertain any questions if you would have them.
You have accomplished an incredible amount of work. You've obviously spent an incredible amount of time, and I'm sure everybody is appreciative of that, and you bring us a lot of good facts and a lot of good support for this particular bill. And we thank you for your testimony. Are there any questions? Seeing none, I will call William Kaltenbach.
Permission to approach the chairman?
Yes. The hard copies? Thank you very much. You may proceed.
Chairman Wilson, Vice Chairman McCulley, and Ranking Member Williams, who is not here right now, and members of the committee. My name is William Kaltenbach, and my wife and I reside at 3337 Sand Hill Road, Bellevue, Ohio, in Huron County. I come before you today as a proponent of Senate Bill 234, which provides for the possibility of a local referendum to place the issue of industrial wind projects being built or not in the hands of those affected the most, the local residents. Over the past year or so, many in our county, particularly the western portion, have expressed their support of or opposition to the proposed Emerson Creek Wind Project. I have attended public meetings mandated by the Ohio Power Siting Board, commissioner meetings in Huron, Erie, and Seneca counties, court proceedings regarding wind projects, and related legislative actions here in Columbus. I have listened to numerous testimonials, again, both for and against these projects. After all of this, one thing stands out above all else: the introduction of these giant wind projects that could encompass approximately 250 square miles of north central Ohio divides the communities in which they are proposed, and in many cases divides families as well. Between November of 2018, when many of us first heard about Emerson Creek, and March of 2019, the focus locally was on whether or not to pass the payment in lieu of taxes or pilot for the Emerson Creek project. On March 19th, our Huron County Commissioners asked for input from local government bodies affected by the Emerson Creek project, whether to support or oppose the pilot. 3 of the affected townships voted no. 1 did not respond, and 1 voted yes. The 1 township voting yes was Lime Township, my township. In that particular township, 1 of the 3 trustees is a major leaseholder, and another is actually employed by the wind developer, Apex. So some pretty obvious bias there, and ethics don't seem to come into play. On March 21st, our 3 county commissioners voted unanimously against granting the pilot. In their comments prior to voting, it was expressed that all 3 of them were disappointed by how the proposed project was breaking up the area and causing conflict. 1 commissioner commented as to how the pilot was to be a form of local control on these projects, assuming that without it, the projects would not move forward. He went on to say that many things have changed: technology, the economy, etc., and that the cost of building wind projects had declined to the point where the pilot was no longer the local control that it was intended to be. He also encouraged those in attendance that day to contact their state representatives and state senators and tell them what is wrong with the current process and what people would like to see changed. Finally, he stated that the current process just doesn't work anymore. Well, we couldn't agree more. The current process just doesn't work anymore. On October 10th, 2019, the Seneca County Commissioners voted unanimously to endorse pending legislation introduced in the Ohio House by Representative Reinecke, which called for a referendum vote for alternative energy projects. In an accompanying open letter on local control of utility-scale wind development, these commissioners stated, and I quote, "It is therefore our recommendation that there be an effort undertaken at the State House to return to local control," end quote. I'm going to deviate from my submitted testimony a bit here because the following paragraph was very well covered by Mike Parker, who was a trustee in the county that I'm referring to. So with your permission, I'll skip that paragraph in the interest of time. On January 6, 2020, the Thompson Township trustees in Seneca County passed a resolution to intervene against the Republic Wind Project and to oppose all future wind development in their township due to, quote, overwhelming local opposition, end quote. There are currently 13 townships in a 4-county area that will potentially be impacted by pending wind projects. Of those 13, 10 have opposed the projects in some manner. There are currently 3 large industrial wind parks in various stages of the approval process taking place in a 4-county area in north central Ohio, Seneca, Huron, Erie, and Sandusky counties. With additional projects forecast for the area, we will have nearly 250 square miles of rural residential area transformed into an industrial park. Most of you have not been through the approval and siting process that currently exists and may not be aware of the local impact even before turbines are built. It is quite divisive and brings up all kinds of controversial topics such as property rights, safety, long-term health concerns, property devaluation, economic development, industrial invasion of areas zoned residential and agricultural, etc. It divides and marginalizes whole communities. If you have not lived through this in your home districts, please listen to those who have, the county commissioners, the township trustees, the state representatives and state senators, and also the local citizens. Over the past several months, members of our multi-county coalition seeking a greater voice have written hundreds of letters, made countless phone calls, sent numerous emails, and spoken personally to legislators seeking change to the current system. We have traveled to Columbus on several occasions to offer testimony both at the State House and the Public Utilities Commission. We are aware of dissenting points of view. I read the testimony of the chairman of the Paulding County Commissioners who are opposed to companion bill HB 401, and that's fine. If Paulding County wants wind development, then let them fill the county. We are simply asking our state legislators to give all of us, pro and con, a true voice in the single biggest event to impact our communities in our lifetime. Please support Senate Bill 234 in its entirety. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions? Before you step down, you are the last scheduled witness, but I want to say, through HB 6, through this process of this particular bill, you all have represented yourselves and your friends and neighbors extremely well. You've worked hard. I'm amazed at the research that each of the witnesses today has taken on and impressed with the amount of time it took to bring that to us, to rally your neighbors to write the letters, and I can't predict what the outcome will be. But oftentimes I've been told, if you know you've done your best, there's something to be proud of. So we will move forward. We will see if this can't prevail for you, but know that you have represented yourself with honor. Any other business to come before this committee? We are adjourned.